Do you feel we can do better? How do we do better at engaging people in a real debate about the trade-offs and the need to make more rational decisions? Because we're not very good at it now in our cultures. We were once, but we're not now. How can we get a better debate around this so that we get better policies for the sake of our children in particular?
John, I think part of it is we have to address our fear first and foremost. I mean, I think that more than anything else has driven the division over COVID policy. This abject fear of what the disease is. It's a deadly disease. One should be concerned, but should one put aside one's rational faculties in order just because of that fear? It makes no sense. Let's look and see, okay, how deadly is it? Let's actually consider all the costs and all the benefits. I think we have to get back to that kind of thinking, that there are trade-offs. We can't live in a utopian world where we can pretend that the virus will somehow disappear if we just shut down hard enough. If we just pay enough pain and cost, it'll go away. I mean, that's not feasible. I think that kind of reality, I'm actually, in some sense, John, I'm kind of hopeful. I mean, I think I'm starting to see some sense that, look, we have to think about the cost. I saw yesterday, I saw a story that apparently in South Korea, there was a massive protest over this very severe lockdown they've had for a very, very long time. People around the world are feeling these costs, really feeling them. And again, it's not just to their pocketbooks, it's their entire lives. Like, what is the purpose of our lives if not to live them? So I think that kind of thinking will start to take over, because it's too real, John. I mean, you can't just pretend like it's going to just end. When will it end? And we hope for a vaccine. I hope for a vaccine, but do we really premise all of our livelihoods on whether a vaccine can be produced in an absolute record amount of time? I mean, we should invest in it. We should do the science as rapidly as we can, make sure that the data on it are clear so that we understand if the vaccine is produced, it's safe. But should we bet our entire society on that one outcome? Seems like an unwise bet.
It does. I'd be very interested in your professional opinion on the chances of us having something reasonable, say, by the end of next year. Because here in Australia, the experts I've spoken to have said, look, we may have something. They're cautiously optimistic, but they don't believe it would be available in any significant numbers until the end of next year. That's a long way away.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S., what it's done is it's made a bet. So we've decided to purchase large quantities of vaccine candidates that have not undergone phase 3 trials yet. We have not undergone safety and efficacy testing in large scale. If those trials show that the vaccine is not safe or effective, we've made a bad bet. If they show that they are effective or safe, well, then now we'll have a large number of doses to deploy very, very quickly. The thing about vaccine trials is you have to have sufficient numbers of people, because you're employing them at scale. The entire population, you expect to have the vaccine, right? Any drug that you give to the entire population, you're going to see some funny side effects here, some interactions there. You want a sufficiently large database of having tested it to tell the population honestly that, yeah, it's safe for you, no matter who you are. Will we have enough experience with the vaccines to convince enough of the population to take it safely in time? Even if we have enough doses, that's the thing I'm wondering about. And I don't know. I mean, I'm more optimistic. I have to admit, I'm more optimistic than I was in April. But I mean, I have to say, I don't want to bet our entire society on that. I think that's a bad bet.
Which countries do you think have managed it better than others? I'm very conscious that we are very obsessed with what's happening in our own countries in the West, and particularly in this country, massive coverage, often driven by the political distaste, without elaborating the point, for the current president. There's this Trump delusion or syndrome that just people lose their rationality. So he's seen to have mishandled COVID. So there's massive sort of talk about how how America's handled it. But putting that aside, in your view, who has handled it perhaps wisely and in a way that might be seen to have been more effective in retrospect?
I mean, you have to ask them that question in the long run. We're not in the long run as yet.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the metric that I look for to see whether a country is handling it well, and it's actually a very simple number. We know with certainty who the vulnerable are. It's older people, especially older people living in nursing homes and other environments where they're closed in. Countries that have handled it well have managed to protect those populations, and countries that haven't managed it well, that you've seen, or states that haven't managed it well, that population has suffered severely.
That's particularly the case in New York, as I understand it, to take a part of one country.
It's true in New York, but it's true around the United States. I think we have not handled it as well as we might. And there's some states that have done better than others, admittedly, but we have not have not protected our nursing home population as well as we might have. I think Sweden, for instance, sometimes held up as a successful example. I think in the early days of the epidemic, they actually saw some spread in nursing homes that potentially might have been avoidable. They corrected course, I think, afterwards. So I think in the long run, when you're judging whether a country has done well, I think that's because you have to judge based on what information you have at the time. We knew that the elderly were vulnerable in March. We saw that in the Chinese data, particularly vulnerable, and we knew that the disease spreads in tightly closed environments. And the policy in March was let's protect our hospitals, because we were looking at Italy and thinking, oh my gosh, the hospitals are overrun there. I think the United States did a fantastic job protecting our hospitals, to the point where hospitals were empty for months, so many of them going near bankruptcy. And we forgot about the nursing homes in those months. So I think there's both. I mean, there's successes and failures. It's a question relative to what you know at the time. In retrospect, that's what I'm going to judge it on: is how well did we actually take advantage of the information we had. And the key piece of information is who's vulnerable. I think in many ways, I mean, most countries and many countries. I mean, I think Australia's done well thus far. The question is, how will it do going forward? If you look at I was looking at the statistics on Australia. It is skewed toward the older population where the deaths are, the number of deaths. But you all are not in the long run. You are in the intermediate run. And so the question is, how well will you protect? Learn the lessons from the world around you to protect the nursing homes, and then impose fewer costs on everyone else who aren't really at high risk from this disease, right? So that's the other thing I'll look at. So you were looking at talking about suicides before. I'm going to look at those numbers. I want to know how many mental health problems did we cause as a result of the lockdowns. How tight did the tight lockdowns affect the poor differentially? Did their kids not did the gap between poor and rich in educational outcomes expand as a result of the lockdowns? I want to look at those kind of numbers. Those are numbers also we know. So those are scientific facts we knew in March. We knew that long before March. So I think it's hard to do an assessment on the fly, and obviously, as you said, people's minds are distorted by the political races that are happening in front of them. Really, if you want to do a clean assessment at the end of the day, it's what do we know? How well did we act on the information we know now? Or knew then, I mean.
I think one of the great problems is that people are being lulled into a sense that governments can solve these problems and they'll be judged on how well they do, regardless of how much money they borrow or indeed effectively print. And there's an assumption, particularly amongst many young people who have become disillusioned with democratic capitalism, that this sort of control is good. You've just got to get the control settings right. I'm not certain that we're not seriously damaging our understanding of personal freedom and personal responsibility, which may be very damaging politically in the long term, even to the extent that people think, well, that debt doesn't matter, you just print more money. It's not true. It doesn't happen. Money that's not backed by real wealth in the end and the real creation of wealth is false money. And when confidence in it is lost, as we know, the results can be disastrous. History tells us that. We are on, I think, a very, very dangerous precipice with all of this. We need to be very careful indeed. And I think what I'm getting at is I just wonder whether we've got the collective willpower now to sit down properly and analyse all of this calmly, learn the lessons, and sober up rather than lurch into even more silly political decisions further down the road. And I don't want to buy into the US election. I'd love to in other contexts, but I'm not going to ask you to do that. But you can see an awful lot of emotion and an awful lot of feeling. And if I can say so as somebody just looking in from the outside, not a lot of highly thought through rational discussion. It bodes very ill for future policy, in my view.
John, I mean, I share your concern. I mean, I think democratic capitalism has yielded enormous benefits, obviously for the developed world, but also for the developing world. I mean, I think a statistic of 1 billion people lifted out of poverty in the last 10, 20 years around the world. And I think our understanding of the importance of that has shrunk in ways that has astonished me. And you said something really interesting. I think is really right. We have this sense that somehow we're in a position that we have this knowledge. The government has this knowledge. You can just do the calculations, you run the model, and you figure out how to make the economy go, how to make COVID go away. We can just solve it. If one thing that comes out of this COVID crisis, I hope, is that we lose that faith. The world is a complicated place, and the reason why democratic capitalism works is because it lets the distributed knowledge of billions of people have their say. If you try to centralize all the decisions in one place, you're gonna make mistakes, and we've learned that lesson the hard way over and over again. I hope we don't have to learn it the hard way again.
Thank you for watching this episode. If you value vital conversations like this one, please like, share, subscribe, and join the conversation.